February 22nd, 2018. Constantia, one of Cape Town's most peaceful suburbs. But in the early hours of that morning, peace burned away in the heat of a car fire at the Deep River train station. Inside that burnt BMW, investigators found the unrecognizable remains of a woman later confirmed to be 57-year-old Gill Packham, a beloved schoolteacher, mother, and wife. Her disappearance the night before had barely been reported when the discovery changed everything. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore, it was murder. The deeper police dug, the darker the truth became: betrayal, lies, and a secret life that shattered the illusion of a perfect home. In this At Dark Truth 25 true crime investigation, we retrace every moment from Gill's final hours to the evidence that exposed the man she trusted most. This isn't just a story about one woman's death. It's about how love, control, and obsession can collide in the most violent way imaginable. Stay with us till the end, because every clue matters, and the truth, no matter how dark, deserves to be seen. If you believe every story deserves justice, hit like, share, and subscribe to At Dark Truth 25, where every shadow tells a story that must be heard. The quiet beauty of Constantia. There are places in the world that seem untouched by tragedy. Places where sunlight filters through tall trees, where vineyards stretch like green carpets over rolling hills. In Cape Town's southern suburbs lies one such haven, Constantia. Constantia isn't the kind of place where chaos lives. It's quiet, refined, shielded by old money and high walls. The people here greet each other with polite smiles, share wine at dinner parties, and go about their lives believing that the world beyond those gates, the world of crime, danger, and heartbreak, cannot reach them. But it did. And when it did, it came not in the form of a stranger or a thief, but from within one of those very homes. In one of these streets stood the home of Gill and Rob Packham, a couple who, on the surface, appeared to have everything. A comfortable house, 2 grown daughters, stable careers, a shared life that stretched across decades of marriage. Gill was a teacher at the Springfield Convent School in Wynberg, known for her warmth and dedication. Her colleagues remember her as the calm in every storm. She wasn't flashy or loud. She was the kind of woman who made others feel seen. Students adored her. Parents trusted her. She was, in every sense, the heart of the school. At home, she lived quietly, reading novels, caring for her pets, enjoying long walks in Constantia's leafy lanes. Friends say she was soft-spoken but firm, patient but proud. She valued decency and kindness and believed, perhaps too deeply, in giving second chances. Her husband, Rob Packham, was charismatic, successful, and widely respected in business circles. He'd held senior management positions and was known as a problem solver, the kind of man people trusted instinctively. He was handsome, confident, and seemingly devoted to his family. But as anyone who studies human behavior knows, perfection often hides something else. Behind that easy smile and the polished reputation, cracks had begun to form. They weren't visible from the outside, not yet. But to those who knew Gill closely, there was something in her tone that had changed. Something quieter, more cautious. A friend once said, Gill stopped talking about the future. She spoke only about getting through the week. At first, people assumed it was stressing the ordinary wear and tear of marriage. After all, who doesn't have rough patches? But time would show that this was no ordinary rough patch. It was the beginning of an unraveling one that would end in fire, loss, and the haunting silence of unanswered questions. When you walk through a home like theirs, you can feel the lives once lived there. The laughter that filled the rooms, the warmth that used to live in the air. But you can also feel the tension that lingers after it's gone. Neighbors recalled that the Packhams were polite but distant. They rarely attended gatherings anymore. Gill seemed withdrawn. Rob, on the other hand, was often away traveling for work, or so he said. It was the kind of quiet drift that happens slowly. So slowly, you don't notice until one day you're living beside a stranger. In stories like these, there's always a moment, a turning point that, in hindsight, feels obvious. For Gill Packham, it may have been the realization that love alone wasn't enough to keep her safe. Those close to her later said she'd been trying to make it work. She was still attending counseling sessions, still showing up, still hoping. But you can only patch a sinking ship for so long. And in February 2018, that ship sank quietly, violently, and irreversibly. Thursday, February 22nd, 2018, began like any other day. Gill left school smiling. She told her colleagues she'd see them tomorrow. She mentioned she was having dinner with family that evening. No one saw her again. That night, she vanished from the quiet safety of Constantia without warning, without explanation. Calls went unanswered. Her phone went silent. And by the next morning, panic began to ripple through her family and colleagues. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Within 24 hours, the name Gill Packham would no longer belong to a beloved teacher, but to the center of a national tragedy. Evil doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it lives right next to you. A woman of grace and routine. Every great mystery begins long before the day of the crime. It begins quietly in the choices people make, in the compromises they accept, and in the silences they learn to live with. For Gill Packham, her story didn't begin the night she disappeared. It began decades earlier, with a life built carefully around stability, kindness, and routine. The teacher everyone loved. At Springfield Convent School in Wynberg, Cape Town, Gill was more than a teacher. She was a mentor, a listener, and a safe place for students who needed one. She taught English and life orientation, guiding her students not just through exams, but through life's messier lessons: empathy, resilience, and honesty. Colleagues recall her calm energy. Gill didn't rush. She never raised her voice. Even on chaotic days, she'd smile and say, "Let's breathe and start again." Her classroom walls were lined with quotes: Shakespeare, Maya Angelou, Mandela, all reminders that strength and grace often live in quiet people. Gill loved her students fiercely, and in return, they adored her. She believed in showing up for others even when no one showed up for her. A life of predictable comfort. Home for Gill was a reflection of who she was: tidy, modest, filled with family photos and the smell of brewed coffee. She liked things in their place. Her mornings began early, often before sunrise. She'd walk the family dog, make breakfast, check lesson plans, and leave the house by 6:30 a.m. sharp. Friends described her as reliable to the minute. If Gill was late, something was wrong. It's that consistency, that rhythm, that made her disappearance so terrifying. Because people like Gill don't just vanish. Love, ambition, and cracks in the glass. Gill met Robert Packham in her 20s. He was intelligent, charming, and ambitious, the kind of man who could make a room feel smaller when he entered it. He had big dreams and seemed genuinely smitten by her. In the early years, they were inseparable, traveling, building their careers, raising 2 daughters together. Friends say Gill glowed around him. She found in Rob a sense of partnership, someone who could challenge her, complete her. But over time, ambition and ego began to shift the balance. Rob's career grew demanding. His business life took him away often. Gill, ever supportive, anchored the family, quietly holding together birthdays, dinners, school events, the invisible glue of domestic life. Yet in that quiet support, something vital was lost. When one person gives too much, the other begins to forget how much was given. Gill's world revolved around keeping things peaceful, even when peace came at the cost of her own happiness. The slow drift apart. By the late 2010s, close friends noticed a change. Gill had grown thinner, quieter, and withdrawn. She rarely spoke about Rob anymore, and when she did, her tone was careful. There were rumors of infidelity, emotional distance, and financial tension. Nothing explosive, nothing tabloid-worthy, just the slow suffocation of 2 lives moving in opposite directions. Still, Gill tried. Marriage counseling, date nights, even family trips, all efforts to rekindle what was lost. But behind those attempts lived a woman exhausted by the weight of trying alone. One friend later told investigators, Gill believed in commitment, even when it stopped believing in her. A secret she tried to hide. In early 2018, Gill confided to a close friend that things at home had become complicated. Rob had been distant and irritable. There were arguments about honesty and a sense that he was living another life. She didn't say much more, just that she was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of keeping up the facade. She also mentioned something strange. If something ever happens to me, make sure people ask the right questions. At the time, her friend brushed it off thinking Gill meant emotionally, not literally. But after February 22nd, those words would echo like a chilling premonition. The calm before the storm. February was always busy at school. Gill was helping plan a student event, reviewing reports, and preparing for a small family gathering that weekend. Everything about her routine was intact: messages, appointments, emails right up until the day she disappeared. She had no reason to leave suddenly. No history of depression. No secret lover. No financial crisis. Nothing that pointed to a voluntary disappearance. It was as if she'd been erased mid-sentence. That last day, witnesses remembered her as cheerful, smiling in the staff room, talking about dinner plans. She waved goodbye at the school gate. And then nothing. No texts. No calls. No sign of life. It wasn't until her car, a green BMW, was found burning in Deep River the next morning that South Africa realized something horrific had happened. But who would want to hurt Gill? And why? When detectives arrived at the scene, they couldn't yet identify the body inside. The fire had destroyed almost everything. But one thing was clear. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her gone, and they wanted her story to burn with her. A puzzle with missing pieces. By the evening of February 23rd, Gill's disappearance was headline news. Students were in shock. Friends gathered at the school chapel in silence. The Packham home was surrounded by police. Detectives began the painful task of unraveling the Packham marriage, piece by piece, and what they found beneath the surface would shatter the image of the perfect Constantia couple forever. Everyone wanted to know, was Gill the victim of random violence, or was the truth far closer to home? The night she vanished. Every disappearance begins with an ordinary night. No thunderclap of warning, no shadow at the door. Just routine, the kind that feels too familiar to question until it's gone. February 22nd, 2018, a Thursday evening in Constantia, Cape Town. The air was still, the neighborhood peaceful. To anyone outside, it was just another quiet suburban night. But inside the Packham home, silence had begun to take a different shape, one that felt heavy, tense, and final. The last hours. Gill had left Springfield Convent School around 4 p.m. She waved goodbye to her colleagues, a gesture so normal that no one thought twice. One of them remembered her saying she had errands to run before heading home. Her car, a green BMW, was seen driving along the familiar route toward Bergvliet. She was expected at home by early evening. But by 7 p.m., messages to her phone went unanswered. At first, there was no panic. Gill was responsible, dependable if she hadn't replied. She was probably caught up in something small, a phone battery, traffic, a detour. But when hours passed with no word, that logic began to fall apart. The calls that went nowhere. Her sister, Kathy, tried calling several times, no answer. A few friends sent texts, asking if she was fine. By 9 p.m., her phone was going straight to voicemail. At home, Rob Packham told police later that he thought she'd gone out for a drive to clear her head after an argument earlier that day. He said he wasn't concerned, not yet. But when midnight came and went, even Rob had to admit something was wrong. He told investigators he went out searching for her, driving through nearby streets, calling her name, hoping to spot her car parked somewhere nearby. He claimed he even drove past Deep River, where, hours later, her car would be found burning. The fire at Deep River. At 5:50 a.m., a security guard at the Deep River train station noticed smoke rising from an industrial parking area. When emergency responders arrived, they found a BMW engulfed in flames. The fire had burned so intensely that the metal was warped. The tires melted to the tar. Once the flames were extinguished, firefighters made a horrifying discovery: a body inside the trunk. It was impossible to identify at first. The body was burned beyond recognition, but the vehicle's registration pointed directly to Gill Packham. Forensic teams cordoned off the area. Detectives were called in. And suddenly, what was a missing person case became a suspected homicide. Rob's behavior raises questions. When police arrived at the Packham residence to inform Rob, his reaction raised eyebrows. Neighbors said he appeared composed, not shocked. One officer recalled that he didn't ask the usual questions, not, "Where was she found?" or "Was she alive?" Just a quiet nod and the words, "I knew something like this might happen." He told investigators that Gill had been emotionally unstable, unhappy, and perhaps suicidal. But those closest to Gill described a completely different woman, hopeful, focused, planning a school event and family visit just days ahead. Even her diary, later recovered, showed no signs of despair, only notes about students, grocery lists, and a reminder to call her daughter. If Gill was planning anything, it wasn't her own death. The investigation begins. Detectives immediately began reconstructing her final 24 hours. They examined CCTV footage, phone records, and vehicle tracking data. Gill's phone had last pinged near her home at 6:15 p.m. After that, it went silent. The timeline began to tighten. Witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing raised voices from the Packham home that evening, though no one saw what followed. Forensic experts later found traces of blood and bleach inside the garage, faint but enough to raise suspicion. It was as if someone had tried to erase what happened. Family and friends in despair. As news broke, Cape Town was stunned. Teachers and students at Springfield Convent gathered in prayer circles. Her colleagues described the situation as unreal. A woman like Gill, cautious, kind, devoted, didn't just disappear, let alone die violently. Her sister, Kathy, refused to believe it. She told the media, "Gill was the most careful person I knew. Something happened to her, something she didn't choose." The breaking point. When DNA tests confirmed that the body was indeed Gill Packham, grief turned to anger and suspicion turned toward the one person who knew her best. Police began digging deeper into Rob's phone records, text messages, and movements on the night of her disappearance. What they found would soon unravel the life he had tried so hard to present as perfect. But before that revelation came, detectives needed to answer a haunting question. When exactly did Gill die, and where? The burned car hid many answers, but not all. Forensic teams uncovered a faint smell of accelerant and traces of melted plastic that didn't belong to the car. Someone had staged this fire. The truth, it seemed, was still burning beneath the ashes. Behind closed doors, as police dug deeper, a portrait of Gill and Rob's marriage began to take shape, one far different from the polite smiles and family photos. Behind the polished walls of their Constantia home, resentment had been festering. Gill's discovery of Rob's affair months earlier had strained everything. Sources close to the investigation revealed that Gill had confronted him, even threatened to leave. Rob, they said, was terrified of losing face, his home, his image. He cared more about what people thought than what she felt, a friend told investigators. The night she vanished, something finally snapped. A missing wife, a burning car, a husband who knew too much. The story was beginning to unfold like a crime novel, except this time, every chapter was real. In the ashes of a BMW, the truth waited to be found. The discovery at Deep River. Morning in Deep River, Cape Town. A cool mist hung low over the industrial area as commuters began their daily routines. But near the train station, smoke still curled upward, the bitter aftermath of a fire that had burned through the night. A green BMW, scorched, twisted, and unrecognizable, sat cordoned off by yellow tape. For investigators, this wasn't just another burned vehicle. It was the scene of something far darker. The scene that shook Constantia. Detective Captain Anton Boysen arrived at 6:30 a.m. The car was still warm to the touch. Inside, everything was gone. Upholstery, glass, identity, all melted into blackened fragments. The firefighters who had extinguished the flames were visibly shaken. One of them had noticed the unmistakable outline of a human form in the trunk. We knew right away it wasn't an accident. What lay before them was a body, folded unnaturally, consumed by fire. No ID, no phone, no jewelry, just fragments of a life turned to ash. The forensic hunt begins. By 8 a.m., a forensic team from Cape Town's Serious Crimes Division had sealed off the area. Photographs were taken, samples collected, and the vehicle was towed for full examination. The smell of fuel lingered, unmistakable to anyone familiar with accelerants. Investigators found traces of petrol residue near the rear bumper and on the road beneath the car. That single detail changed everything. It meant intent. Someone had tried to destroy evidence. Someone had wanted this car, and whoever was inside to disappear. Identification and the first shockwave. It didn't take long for the registration number to lead detectives to a name, Gill Packham. The same woman reported missing just hours earlier by her husband, Robert Packham. When detectives made the connection, the case pivoted instantly, from missing person to suspected murder. They contacted the Packham residence immediately. Rob confirmed that his wife hadn't returned home the night before. He said he'd been worried, but assumed she needed time alone. The officer on the other end of the line noted his tone. Calm, measured, perhaps too controlled. Within hours, Rob was asked to come in to identify the vehicle. He did so without hesitation. He confirmed it was Gill's car, but when shown photos of the burned remains inside, he reportedly said very little. I can't be sure, he told police. But if that's Gill's car, then it must be her. Public grief and private questions. The story broke quickly. By midday, local radio stations and TV outlets carried headlines. Body found in burned car, maybe missing Constantia woman. The quiet suburb of Constantia was suddenly flooded with reporters, satellite vans, and police cars. Students at Springfield Convent School lit candles near the chapel steps. Her colleagues gathered in shock. Gill Packham, teacher, mother, and beloved community figure was gone. And beneath the mourning, suspicion was already taking root. How does a woman vanish from her own home and end up burned beyond recognition, just miles away? Clues in the ashes. Forensic technicians spent the next 48 hours reconstructing what little they could from the scene. They discovered traces of petrol consistent with a container being poured inside the trunk. A faint shoe print near the driver's door. A small cloth fiber, partially melted, that would later be linked to the Packham home's cleaning rags. Even the seatbelt mechanisms showed something odd. They'd been manually cut, not melted. To investigators, it was a signature of deliberate staging. The killer wanted us to think it was spontaneous, one forensic expert noted later. But you can't fake physics. The autopsy. The body was sent to the Salt River mortuary for examination. Despite the severe burns, medical examiners could extract partial DNA samples and analyze bone fractures. The results were both revealing and horrifying. Gill hadn't died in the fire. She had been beaten, her skull fractured before the flames ever touched her. And traces of sedative compounds were found in her bloodstream. This was murder, brutal, calculated, and personal. Data doesn't lie. With forensic evidence confirming foul play, detectives turned to the digital trail. They subpoenaed phone records for both Gill and Rob. Gill's phone had gone offline around 6:15 p.m. the night she disappeared. But Rob's phone had an interesting pattern: multiple signal drops, gaps in movement, and one tower ping close to the Deep River area around 9 p.m. When confronted, Rob claimed he'd been driving around looking for her. But his phone data suggested he'd lingered near the industrial zone far longer than he admitted. And then there was another layer. His work phone, which he claimed was at home, had also pinged near the same area. Two phones. One night. One fire. The puzzle comes together. By the weekend, detectives had enough to focus their investigation squarely on Rob Packham. They began to quietly build a profile, interviewing friends, family, colleagues. The portrait that emerged wasn't flattering. They learned about the affair, the growing tension at home, and Gill's private fears, how she told a friend that she no longer felt safe. Rob's charm, once his social armor, began to look like a disguise. It's often those who smile the most who are hiding the darkest truths. The media storm. Within days, the case dominated South African headlines. News anchors spoke of a respectable Constantia family torn apart. Opinion columns questioned whether domestic violence was hiding behind the veneer of upper-middle-class perfection. The public was divided. Some defended Rob as a grieving husband, others called for his arrest. And while the world speculated, detectives worked in silence, piecing together the evidence they needed. By early March, the results of the DNA analysis came back. The body in the BMW was confirmed to be Gill Packham. Now, the hunt for her killer had officially begun. A shift in focus. Investigators returned to the Packham home, this time with a warrant. They searched the garage, the laundry, the family car, even the drains. And there, beneath a layer of cleaning supplies, they found a bottle of bleach, partially used, and a rag with faint reddish stains. Forensics confirmed it. Human blood. The unseen witness. Neighbors also began coming forward with strange details. One reported seeing Rob's BMW leave the house around 8 p.m. followed, minutes later, by another car matching Gill's. Another heard metal clanging in the garage earlier that evening. Small fragments of testimony, each insignificant on its own, began aligning like pieces of a puzzle. By now, detectives no longer saw this as a whodunit. They believed they knew who. Now they needed to prove how. Behind the smile. Meanwhile, Rob continued to play the part of the grieving husband. He attended memorials, gave interviews, and told friends how crushed he felt. But to the detectives watching him closely, his calm was chilling. He cried on cue, one officer later said. But there was no fear in his eyes, just control. The fire may have burned the evidence, but it couldn't burn the truth. The web of lies. Every crime begins with a lie. A lie to others, a lie to oneself, and eventually, a lie that refuses to stay hidden. In the case of Gill Packham, investigators soon realized that the night she vanished wasn't a mystery of chance, it was a performance. And the man at the center of it had rehearsed his role well. The husband under the microscope. By early March 2018, detectives had quietly shifted their focus from what happened to who made it happen. All signs pointed toward one man, Robert Packham. To the public, he was the grieving husband, a successful businessman, a devoted father, a man of composure and tragedy. But behind the scenes, his story was unraveling. When he first spoke to police, Rob claimed he'd been home all evening, worried when Gill didn't return. He said he'd driven around later that night, searching the usual routes. But phone records painted a different picture. His work phone and personal phone showed strange gaps, silent hours when they'd been manually switched off. And at 9 p.m., both devices briefly pinged in the same cell tower region as Deep River, the exact location where Gill's car burned. He said he was searching, but he was far too close to the fire. Digital deception. When confronted with this data, Rob's calm exterior cracked for the first time. He claimed he must have been lost or driven in circles that night. He couldn't recall the exact route, but detectives knew what they were seeing. Classic evasion. Further digging revealed something else. In the weeks before Gill's death, Rob had been using multiple SIM cards, one registered under a false name. Through this number, he'd exchanged hundreds of messages with another woman, a long-term mistress he'd met during a business trip. "Can't wait to see you again," one message read. "Soon everything will be sorted." To investigators, those words took on a sinister meaning. A double life exposed. Friends and colleagues describe Rob as controlled, image-conscious, and deeply private. He'd built his world around appearances, the perfect house, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. But in reality, he'd been juggling lies on every front. Financial strain, affairs, mounting frustration in a marriage he saw as trapping his potential. Gill, meanwhile, had started to sense the truth. A close friend later told detectives. She said Rob was distant, secretive. She even thought he was planning to leave. What she didn't know was that he already had one foot out the door, emotionally, if not physically. It wasn't love anymore, it was reputation. And reputation can make people dangerous. The timeline tightens. Detectives reconstructed the hours before and after Gill's disappearance minute by minute. 6:15 p.m., Gill's phone goes dark near the Packham home. 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., neighbors report strange noises, like a car door slamming and metal hitting concrete. 8:15 p.m., Rob's phone briefly connects to his office Wi-Fi. 9 p.m., both his phones ping near Deep River. 9:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. security footage from the area captures a dark-colored sedan entering and leaving the lot where Gill's car would later be found. The car's make and headlights were consistent with Rob's BMW. He thought he'd left no witnesses. But data doesn't forget. The lie about the clothes. Investigators also noticed something odd when they revisited the Packham home. In Rob's laundry hamper were men's clothes that had been hastily washed damp, still smelling faintly of detergent. Forensic tests later found microscopic traces of blood. He claimed he'd spilled wine, but the DNA matched Gill's. Behavioral breakdown. Criminal psychologists were brought in to assess Rob's behavior. Their conclusion was clear. His detachment wasn't grief, it was control. He didn't display emotional volatility, only irritation when pressed for details. They spoke of Gill in the past, tense almost immediately. He avoided questions about his movements, but was quick to criticize her mood swings and emotional instability. It was a subtle deflection, a tactic to shift sympathy and suspicion. When someone's first instinct after tragedy is self-preservation, one profiler noted, it usually means they already know what happened. The mistress speaks. The final blow came when detectives tracked down Rob's mistress, a woman named Louise. When interviewed, she revealed that Rob had told her he was planning a new chapter, that he'd end things soon with his wife. He'd even sent her messages the day after Gill disappeared, saying, "Rough night. Things will clear soon." To detectives, it was the final red flag. No man who just lost his wife would be making romantic promises. The web of lies was now collapsing in on itself. The confrontation. When police summoned Rob for a formal interview, he arrived in a crisp shirt and suit as if attending a meeting. He answered questions politely, but his answers contradicted evidence on nearly every point. He denied driving near Deep River cell data proved otherwise. He claimed he'd last seen Gill that morning a neighbor heard shouting that evening. He said he hadn't cleaned the garage, bleach traces said he had. As the session went on, his composure slipped. His voice grew sharper. He began fidgeting, deflecting, growing defensive. When investigators revealed they had forensic evidence linking him to the crime, he simply leaned back and said, "You're making a mistake. You'll see." But the detectives had seen enough. Preparing the case. Behind closed doors, prosecutors began assembling a case that would grip South Africa. They had motive, a failing marriage, and a secret affair. They had opportunity, no alibi during the critical hours. And they had physical evidence, DNA, cell data, and contradictory statements. All that remained was to put it together in court and expose the man behind the mask. But before that could happen, investigators wanted to understand something deeper. How far was Rob willing to go to keep his secrets? The mask slips. Even as suspicion closed in, Rob maintained his innocence publicly. He attended vigils. He hugged family members. He gave media interviews, speaking about Gill's beautiful soul. But one camera caught something haunting during an interview outside the courthouse. As reporters swarmed, Rob adjusted his tie and smiled briefly, as though posing. It was fleeting, almost unnoticeable. But for those who studied human behavior, it said everything. The guilt was hiding in plain sight. The pressure builds. By late March, whispers of an imminent arrest spread through Cape Town. Rob's colleagues began distancing themselves. His mistress stopped responding. His own daughters grew quiet, torn between love and disbelief. The web of lies had finally trapped the man who wove it. He thought he could control the story, but the truth was writing itself. When the lies ran out, justice began to close in. Evidence speaks louder than words. Every crime leaves a trace. Sometimes it's a drop of blood, sometimes a digital signal, and sometimes it's the silence between two stories. In Gill Packham's case, silence was everywhere, but so were clues waiting to be uncovered. The forensic awakening. When detectives arrived at the burnt wreckage of Gill's car, they didn't just see ashes. They saw a timeline of violence. The fire had destroyed much, but not everything. Forensic experts from the South African Police Service, SAPS, spent days sifting through the wreckage, layer by layer. Among the melted metal and shattered glass, they recovered a seatbelt buckle fused with traces of human hair, microscopic blood spatter beneath the dashboard, and fragments of a watch strap still clasped, as if the victim had been restrained. But the most shocking discovery came when DNA results returned. Despite the extreme heat, scientists confirmed the body inside that car was Gill Packham. It was no longer a missing persons case. It was murder. Fire couldn't erase the truth. Reconstructing the fire, investigators brought in arson specialists. Their analysis revealed chilling precision. The fire had been started deliberately, using an accelerant most likely petrol poured around the driver's seat and ignited with a lighter or match. What stood out was the ignition point, directly under the steering wheel, near the floorboard. This wasn't random. It was calculated. Someone wanted that car to burn completely, hiding both the victim and the evidence. But the arsonist made a mistake, one they couldn't possibly have known. In modern vehicles, fuel residue, heat sensors, and microcontrollers retain data even after combustion. Experts extracted fragments from the car's electronic system. The data showed that the engine had been started, then stopped abruptly only seconds before the fire began, meaning the killer was inside that car moments before it ignited. The digital footprints. With forensic results pointing to foul play, detectives turned to the digital realm. In modern investigations, phones speak louder than alibis. Using cell tower triangulation, analysts mapped out Robert Packham's phone movement on the night of February 22, 2018. The results were damning. At 8:40 p.m., his device pinged near the Packham residence. At 9 p.m., it registered near Deep River Industrial Park, the site of the burning car. At 9:15 p.m., both his phones went offline. By 10 p.m., they were back online, near his home. A perfect 60-minute blackout, long enough to commit the crime, drive, and dispose of evidence. Investigators also noticed text messages deleted from Rob's phone that night. But using recovery software, digital forensic experts resurrected fragments. One message, sent hours before the murder, read, "Need to clear my head tonight. Don't wait up." Another, recovered from his mistress's phone, simply said, "Everything will be okay soon." Soon had arrived. But for Gill, it meant the end. The house that hid the truth. Detectives revisited the Packham residence, this time armed with forensic luminol, a chemical that reacts with traces of blood, even if they've been wiped clean. When the lights went off and the spray hit the floor, the room told its story. Tiny blue glows illuminated the garage floor, the door handles, and a section of the wall near the car keys. Even more unsettling, in the washing machine, forensic experts found fibers from a woman's clothing and faint traces of human blood. Gill's blood type. It was no longer speculation. The crime had started at home. The car camera clue. At first, investigators thought they had no visual proof. The area where the car was found had no security cameras directly pointed at the scene. But luck, as it often does, found its way into the case. A nearby business security camera had been facing a reflective window, and that reflection, though distorted, captured the brief, flickering light of the burning vehicle. Moments before the fire ignited, a faint human figure could be seen walking away. Male, medium build, wearing a jacket. Too far for facial ID. But investigators noticed something chilling. The gait matched Rob's movement seen in his workplace surveillance footage. The camera didn't see his face, but it recognized his shadow. The burn pattern revelation. Arson investigators also studied the burn pattern inside the vehicle. What they found shattered Rob's defense. The driver's seat showed no signs of active movement during the blaze, suggesting Gill was already unconscious, or worse, before the fire began. Additionally, the passenger side door had been locked from the outside, meaning whoever set that fire didn't panic. They made sure their victim had no way out. This wasn't rage. It was control. The profile comes together. Criminal psychologists presented a behavioral assessment. The killer exhibited high-functioning planning. The motive was not impulsive, but structured, tied to control, fear of exposure, and loss of image. The disposal method, fire, indicated shame and the desire to obliterate evidence rather than conceal the act. It painted a chilling, psychological portrait, a man who lived for appearances, but whose fear of humiliation pushed him to erase the one person who knew his truth. When a man's identity depends on a lie, he'll burn everything to keep it alive. Evidence versus emotion. While investigators built their case, the public still saw Rob as a grieving husband. He attended press conferences. He smiled for cameras. He played the part perfectly. But behind that mask, police now had forensic confirmation of Gill's body, DNA traces in the house and car, digital proof of his movements, a motive tied to an affair and failing marriage. The story of tragedy was transforming into one of deception. The final link. It all came down to one item recovered from the boot of Rob's BMW, a half-empty petrol canister. At first, he claimed it was for gardening, but forensic testing matched the residue with the same accelerant used to ignite Gill's vehicle. That was the nail in the coffin. The fire that was meant to destroy evidence had instead preserved the most crucial clue, the moment of truth. By the end of March, detectives presented their findings to the prosecuting authority. The evidence was irrefutable. An arrest warrant was issued. On a calm, Cape Town morning, officers arrived at Rob's home. He opened the door in a pressed shirt, smiling faintly. "You're here for me, aren't you?" he said. "Yes, Mr. Packham. You're under arrest for the murder of your wife." The mask had finally fallen. Truth doesn't die in fire. It rises from the ashes. The arrest and the aftermath. When detectives knocked on the door of Rob Packham's Cape Town home, it wasn't just the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of South Africa's most shocking unraveling, the fall of a man who'd built his life on appearances. On that calm March morning, the facade shattered. The arrest. Neighbors later described it as quiet, almost respectful. There were no handcuffs shown, no shouting, just two detectives walking Rob out of his home. His expression? Calm, controlled, almost relieved. But beneath that calm was a storm, years of secrets catching up at last. He'd been living in control for too long. But this time, control had turned into consequence. As cameras rolled, the image of Rob, composed, emotionless, spread across every TV screen in the country. South Africa was stunned. The man who once spoke of his missing wife with such tenderness was now accused of killing her. The headline read, "Husband charged in Constantia wife murder." The public shockwave. Cape Town society was small and gossip relentless. The Packhams had been seen at charity events, school fundraisers, dinners. They were a picture of suburban success. Now, whispers filled every room. "Did you hear? Rob Packham, arrested for Gill's murder." He always seemed so calm, almost too calm. Friends and neighbors who once spoke of him with admiration now described unease. Some remembered how oddly detached he seemed after Gill disappeared, how he talked about moving on only days after her death. To the media, the story was irresistible. A successful businessman, a devoted father, now accused of killing his wife and setting her car ablaze. It had all the elements: love, betrayal, wealth, and horror. The psychology of the fall. Criminal psychologists described Rob's reaction as classic narcissistic disintegration. For people like him, high-functioning, image-driven, exposure isn't just a threat. It's annihilation. He wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his reputation, his career, his control over the narrative. And for someone like Rob, losing control was worse than death. He had been performing for years. But when the curtain fell, there was nothing left behind it. The bail hearing. When Rob first appeared in court, the room was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Cameras flashed. He wore a crisp blue shirt, the same one he'd worn to work meetings. To the world, it looked like he was trying to send a message. "I'm still the respectable man you thought I was." Prosecutors outlined the case. The phone records, the DNA, the car, the affair, the lies. It was a mountain of evidence. But Rob's defense painted a different picture. A devoted husband, falsely accused, trapped by coincidence and police overreach. He was granted bail under strict conditions. And that's when things got even stranger. The man who smiled in court. As Rob walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by flashing cameras, he smiled. Not the smile of a broken man, the smile of someone still playing a part. He thanked reporters, even joked with one. "You'll all see soon. Truth has a way of coming out." But behind that charm was something darker, an unspoken arrogance, a quiet defiance. He believed he could outsmart the system. He always had. The family torn apart. Inside the Packham home, the arrest fractured everything that remained of the family. His daughters, Carrie and Nicola, were devastated. They had lost their mother, and now their father was accused of taking her life. For weeks, they avoided cameras. When they finally spoke, their voices trembled with pain. "We love our father, but we need to know the truth." They were torn between blood and justice, a torment that no child should endure. In the media, their faces became symbols of tragedy. Two daughters trapped between the memory of love and the weight of horror. The investigators reflect. For the detectives, the arrest was both a victory and a burden. They had built the case from ashes, from what little the fire hadn't destroyed. But seeing Rob in court, calm and defiant, they felt uneasy. This wasn't a man crushed by guilt. It was a man convinced he could still manipulate the world around him. He looked at us like we were employees who disappointed him. No fear, just irritation. That attitude strengthened their resolve to make sure the evidence was airtight, the testimony unbreakable. The media circus. As the weeks passed, the Packham case became daily news. Talk shows debated it. Headlines sensationalized it. Social media exploded with theories. Some believed Rob was innocent, framed by circumstance. Others saw the evidence as overwhelming. Documentaries, podcasts, and armchair detectives dissected every detail. The Packham case wasn't just a tragedy. It had become content. And yet, behind the headlines was a haunting truth. A woman's life had ended violently, and the world was turning her pain into spectacle. Gill's story wasn't just a murder case. It was a warning that evil often wears a familiar face. Awaiting justice. While out on bail, Rob returned to work briefly, but his world had collapsed. Friends distanced themselves. His company placed him on leave. Even the walls of his home seemed to close in. He lived under curfew, monitored, yet still denied everything. Every public appearance became a study in composure. He maintained the same rehearsed calm, but those who saw him closely noticed cracks. He'd pause longer before answering. His hands trembled slightly during interviews. The mask, once perfect, was starting to slip. The human cost. While the nation obsessed over Rob, many forgot about Gill. A gentle, private woman, a mother, a teacher, a friend, whose final moments were consumed by fear and fire. In Constantia, friends organized a vigil. Hundreds gathered with candles, singing quietly under the evening sky. A banner read, "Justice for Gill, light in the darkness." For some, the arrest was justice. For others, it was only the beginning of mourning. The calm before the trial. By late 2018, the case was ready for court. Prosecutors had built a narrative of control, deceit, and murder. The defense promised to dismantle it all. Rob Packham, the man who smiled through the storm, was about to face the truth in front of a nation. And, as one detective later said, evidence doesn't lie. But people do until the very end. The trial of Robert Packham would expose more than guilt. It would reveal the cost of a carefully constructed lie. Verdict: the weight of truth. For more than a year, South Africa waited. The courtroom had become a theater of grief, deception, and defiance. But on that final morning, as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the air was heavy, not just with tension, but with truth. This wasn't just about one woman's murder. It was about a man who believed he could rewrite reality. The final day in court. When Rob Packham entered the courtroom that morning, he looked unchanged. Pressed suit, neat tie, the same distant calm. But those who had watched him for months noticed something different. His eyes, once sharp and defiant, now flickered with exhaustion. He took his seat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. Across the aisle sat Gill's family, clutching each other's hands tightly. In front of them, the judge began to speak. The verdict was about to echo across the nation. The judge speaks. The judge's words were calm, methodical, deliberate, a slow dissection of months of testimony. The spoke of lies told with precision, of phone data that didn't match words, of forensic proof burned into metal and ash, and of a man who, in his arrogance, believed that intellect could outsmart truth. The evidence, the judge said, forms a chain so complete that it leaves no reasonable doubt. A pause. Then came the words that would seal Rob's fate forever. Robert Packham, you're found guilty of the murder of your wife, Gill Packham. The moment of realization. The courtroom froze. Reporters stopped typing. A single sob broke the silence from one of Gill's daughters. Rob's reaction was almost surreal. He didn't flinch. He didn't weep. He simply stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight, as though he'd known this moment was coming all along. But for the first time, his eyes betrayed him. A flicker of disbelief. A crack in the armor. The performance was over. He thought he could control the story. But in the end, the story controlled him. The media frenzy. Within minutes, the verdict spread like wildfire. Breaking news banners blared across every network. Rob Packham guilty. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around, cameras flashing. The public was divided, some calling it justice, others tragedy. Podcasts, talk shows, and headlines debated the meaning of it all. How did a man so respected, so seemingly normal, turn into a killer? How far can a need for control push a person before they break? The answers, like the case itself, were complex, a tangle of ego, fear, and desperation. The sentence. Weeks later, the court reconvened for sentencing. The courtroom was quieter this time. There were no outbursts, no gasps, just the slow sound of paper rustling as the judge prepared to speak again. He reviewed the crime, deliberate, cold, premeditated. The spoke of Gill, a kind woman whose life had been extinguished by someone who was meant to love and protect her. Then the words came. For the crime of murder, this court sentences you to 22 years imprisonment. Rob sat motionless. No emotion, no remorse. Just silence, the kind that screams louder than words. Life behind bars. In prison, Rob became a study in contradiction. Some inmates described him as polite, educated, calm, the same mask he wore outside. Others said he was isolated, withdrawn, pacing his cell like a man trapped inside his own mind. He continued to deny his guilt, filing appeals that were ultimately dismissed. But over time, the spotlight faded. The media moved on. The world stopped watching. Only the walls remained, cold, unblinking, eternal witnesses to his solitude. Justice had been served. But peace, that's something no court can deliver. Gill's legacy. While Rob's name dominated headlines, Gill's story became something quieter but deeper. Her former students remembered her kindness. Her colleagues spoke of her laughter, her patience, her gentle wisdom. A scholarship was created in her name to support young women pursuing education. In Constantia, the garden she once tended still blooms each spring, lilies and roses intertwining, growing over the quiet soil. A reminder that even after fire, life finds a way to bloom again. The family's healing. For Gill's daughters, Carrie and Nicola, the verdict brought closure, but not peace. They stood outside the courthouse after sentencing, speaking softly to reporters. This has never been about vengeance. It's about truth. And while we can never bring our mother back, we hope her story helps others see the danger of silence. They returned to their lives, carrying scars that no justice could erase. But in their strength, the world saw something powerful, resilience born from tragedy. The mystery that remains. Even with a conviction, questions linger. Why did Rob choose such brutality? What snapped inside a man so seemingly composed? And could anyone close to him have stopped it before it was too late? Psychologists continue to analyze the Packham case as a textbook example of hidden narcissism and image-driven psychopathy. A reminder that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wear suits, shake hands, and smile for the cameras. Evil doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like control. Gill Packham's story, whether told as the vanished heiress or the Constantia mystery, is more than a tale of murder. It's a reflection of human fragility, how pride can twist love, how image can destroy truth, and how silence can cost a life. And for those who listen, it's a reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most ordinary. Because behind every perfect smile, there might be a secret waiting to burn. Echoes in the ashes. After the verdict, justice had spoken. The courtroom lights had dimmed. The gavel had fallen. But for the people of Constantia and for South Africa as a whole, the echoes of this case were only beginning. Gill Packham was gone, brutally, senselessly, but her story refused to fade. In a country haunted by too many unsolved crimes and silenced women, her voice became part of a larger cry. See us. Protect us. Remember us. The voices that remained. In the months following the verdict, interviews flooded the airwaves. Former students, neighbors, colleagues, everyone had a memory of Gill. She was kind, patient, always offering warmth to anyone who crossed her path. One colleague said, Gill was the kind of person who left a bit of light wherever she went. Even in the darkest place, she found a reason to smile. But what struck people most wasn't her murder. It was how invisible her pain had been before it happened. The quiet unhappiness behind a polite smile. The tension no one dare question. The warning signs missed again and again. The psychology of a killer. For psychologists and criminologists, the Packham case became a study, not just in evidence, but in ego. Rob wasn't a stereotypical killer. He wasn't violent, reckless, or overtly cruel. He was careful, intelligent, image-conscious, the kind of man who lived for appearances. But under that polished surface was an obsession with control. Every part of his life had to fit a narrative he could manage. The perfect job, the perfect home, the perfect wife. Until Gill broke the illusion. And when the image shattered, he destroyed the mirror. Some people kill not because they hate you, but because they can't stand to see the version of themselves you reflect back at them. Ashes of memory. The burned-out wreck of Gill's car still haunts those who saw it. Even after the case closed, police officers and journalists said the image stayed with them. The twisted metal, the faint smell of gasoline, the heat that seemed to linger long after the flames died. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was a symbol of erasure, of denial, of a desperate attempt to turn truth into smoke. But the truth, like ash, settles everywhere. No matter how hard one tries to hide it, the mystery endures. Even with the verdict, questions lingered. What really happened that night? Did Gill confront Rob about his affair? Was it premeditated or a moment of rage? Detectives could only reconstruct fragments, texts, GPS data, CCTV timelines. But the exact moment Gill's life ended remains unknown. And that, perhaps, is what keeps this story alive in the public imagination. In the mystery version, this becomes the haunting refrain. We know how it ended, but we'll never truly know why. And in the true crime-telling, we may not know every minute, but we know enough to stand for justice. Two lenses, one tragedy, both painfully human, a mirror of society. Gill's story reflects something bigger than a marriage gone wrong. It mirrors a world where too often women's voices are dismissed until it's too late. A culture where appearance outweighs authenticity, where people suffer in silence to maintain the illusion of perfection. If we listened sooner, if we paid closer attention to the quiet suffering behind closed doors, how many lives could be saved? The family's message. In a rare interview, Gill's daughters shared a message that resonated with thousands. This isn't just our story. It's every woman's story who's been silenced, doubted, or dismissed. Their strength turned personal grief into public awareness. They supported domestic abuse organizations. They spoke at memorial events about resilience, justice, and the power of remembering. We want people to talk about it, because silence helps no one. And in those words, Gill's voice lived on, through them, through every story retold in her name. Time moves, but shadows stay. Years later, the Packham house was sold. New residents moved in, the garden replanted, the walls repainted. Life continued, as it always does. But for those who knew the story, the place will always carry an invisible echo of laughter once shared, of tension once hidden, and of a tragedy that tore through the quiet beauty of Constantia. The human paradox. Psychologists say what makes this case unforgettable is how ordinary it seemed. No dramatic red flags, no history of violence, just a relationship eroded by secrecy and control until something inside snapped. It's a chilling reminder that evil often hides not in darkness, but in the mundane, the daily routines, the polite smiles, the quiet dinners where love has already died. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who don't look like monsters at all. Legacy of a vanished heiress. Whether you call her the vanished heiress or remember her as the Constantia mystery, Gill Packham's story has become part of South Africa's collective memory. A story of love turned control, of silence turned tragedy, of a woman who disappeared, not into the wilderness, but into the lies of someone she trusted. And even now, her name whispers a warning. When love becomes fear, listen. Justice can punish, but it cannot undo. Mystery can fascinate, but it cannot heal. Yet together, they remind us to look deeper, beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, into the fragile truth of human hearts. Because sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. In memory of Gill Packham, a teacher, a mother, a life that still speaks. The psychology of silence. Time has moved on, but silence never truly leaves. It lingers in the corners of the Packham home, in the paused conversations, in the moments when people wonder if they could have seen it coming. The story of Gill Packham isn't just about a murder. It's about the warning signs that went unnoticed, the quiet unraveling that happens long before tragedy strikes. Behind closed doors, in every neighborhood, there's that one couple who seem perfect, the manicured lawns, the polite smiles, the picture of success. Gill and Rob were that couple. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. They attended dinner parties, shared photos, appeared together at school functions. But inside the walls of their Constantia home, the tension grew. Unspoken words, emotional distance, and a marriage cracking under pressure. Friends recall how Gill began to withdraw. Her laughter was softer, her eyes often distant. She looked tired, like she was trying to hold something together that was already gone. In psychology, this is called covert conflict, when relationships decay not through violence, but through silence. The mask of normalcy. Rob Packham's greatest weapon wasn't anger, it was appearance. He needed to be seen as successful, charming, respectable. Everything was built around image. He was the man who fixed problems, not caused them. But beneath that calm exterior was a storm of insecurity and resentment. He couldn't accept loss, not of control, not of reputation, not of the woman who no longer feared him. Experts later described his behavior as narcissistic collapse, a psychological break that occurs when someone's self-image crumbles under reality. For people like Rob, love isn't about connection. It's about control. When they lose control, they'd rather destroy what they can't possess. The anatomy of control. Criminal profilers studying the Packham case identified a chilling pattern. Before the crime, Rob's behavior became erratic. Secret phone calls, mood swings, sudden outbursts followed by calm apologies. He began rewriting his reality, convincing himself he was the victim, not the perpetrator. This mental shift, psychologists say, is common among image-driven offenders. They construct lies not just to deceive others, but to protect themselves from guilt. In the end, Rob wasn't fighting Gill. He was fighting his own reflection. He killed her to silence the truth she saw in him. The missed warnings. Neighbors remember faint arguments. Gill's colleagues noticed her leaving work early more often. Her friends described moments of confusion, times when Gill would talk around her pain, never naming it directly. She'd say things like, "It's complicated," or "I don't want to make things worse." Those are the red flags that often go unnoticed until it's too late. According to South African domestic violence experts, more than 50% of women who die at the hands of partners had previously shown subtle signs of distress, signs society often misreads as relationship stress. Gill's story exposes how silence becomes fatal. Not just the silence of victims, but the silence of everyone who sees, suspects, and stays quiet. The cost of pretending. Pretending takes energy. It takes years of swallowing truth, smiling through fear, and convincing yourself that things will change. Gill had done that for years. Friends recalled how she often spoke of making it work, even when her heart had already given up. The weight of hope can be heavy, sometimes heavier than despair itself. When she finally started to distance herself emotionally, that's when the danger peaked. We remember how she lived, and what her silence now teaches us about our own. The final reflection. Every life leaf echoes, some loud, some soft, some eternal. Gill's echo is one of awareness, resilience, and truth. She may have vanished, but her story became a voice for countless others still waiting to be heard. And that's the paradox of tragedy. It breaks us, but also binds us. It reveals the darkness, but it forces us to seek light. In every ending, there's a whisper that asks us to do better. So tonight, as we close this story, remember Gill not as a victim, but as a woman whose truth refused to burn away. Final narration, universal call to action. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or question, help keep it alive. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because every view, every share, and every comment helps amplify the voices that were once silenced. And remember, behind every mystery, behind every case, there's a heartbeat, a human being, a truth that deserves to be heard. In memory of Gill Packham, a voice that still echoes. Gill Packham's story isn't just another South African crime case. It's a mirror reflecting how quickly love can turn into something unrecognizable. Behind every headline is a family left to pick up the pieces, a community scarred by the silence of truth. But here on A Dark Truth 25, silence has no power, only the truth does. If this story moved you, don't let it fade away. Click like so more people hear Gill's name. Share this video so her story lives beyond the verdict. And hit subscribe to join us as we uncover the darkest truths still hidden in plain sight. Justice may be slow, but together, we can keep the light burning for those who can no longer speak. I'm your host, and this is Dark Truth 25, where every shadow tells a story.